From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A snafu at the Federal Aviation Administration results in the canceling of 1,300 flights as America's amateur chefs come out to defend their gas stoves. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. Welcome and happy Friday to you both. Our sympathies go out to any listeners who were trying to fly anywhere on Wednesday. Not only were 1,300 flights canceled because of the FAA's problem, but there were 9,700 delays. And those are the kinds of huge numbers that cause a cascade through the airline system and can take days to iron out. Alicia, this was not due to a problem with the air traffic control system as people usually think about it. So can you give us a sense of what happened here?
So Mayor Pete, or now the Transportation Secretary, Buttigieg, says that there was a quote-unquote glitch in this nose-to-air mission system that the FAA uses to alert pilots of potential safety issues before they take off. All pilots are required to consult the NOTAM system before they take off, though a lot of them have actually complained that they're not terribly useful. Some of these, tens of pages long, they can sometimes have dates, 2 months ago alerts, and it's not really relevant to, their flying. So this system on Tuesday crashed. The FAA was rushing, trying to figure out what went wrong. They couldn't figure it out exactly. And so Wednesday morning, they did what we all do when there's a computer problem or something crashes. They tried to reboot it. And during that time, they basically grounded all flights in the U.S. Now, interestingly, Canada experienced a quote-unquote another glitch, which they attributed to a hardware defect Wednesday morning. And again, this seems just completely coincidental. But planes were able to continue flying in Canada. They just weren't able to fly into the U.S. And so it's interesting that you really got the contrast between the two systems, and we can go into later on why the Canadian system seems to function just much better. But here, Buttigieg came out today and said, well, it looks like some employees or personnel made some errors with some databases. That shouldn't cause an entire system that the airlines rely on to go down, and as a result, for planes to be grounded. There should be some kind of redundancy, you'd think. But alas, the FAA doesn't have any backup system other than what it was trying to resort to late Tuesday was a telephone hotline. Yes, call 1-800, get your notification, basically by phone from the FAA, and obviously that didn't work.
A couple things that I would add to the timeline. According to an Associated Press story, this Notice to Air Mission system, NOTAM system, initially failed at about 8:30 in the evening on Tuesday. As Alicia said, there were attempts to fill the gap with a phone hotline. And then when the Wednesday morning traffic really picked up, that's when the whole thing became overwhelmed. The FAA did a ground stop while it rebooted the NOTAM system. That ground stop apparently lasted almost 2 hours. And let's listen to a piece of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg explaining what happened. This is from MSNBC on Wednesday.
Again, there need to be redundancies and layers and layers of protection here. This is an incredibly complex system. So glitches or complications happen all the time, but we can't allow them to ever lead to this level of disruption.
Kim, a couple points I would make is that given the importance of the FAA's mission, this is a failure that I think is pretty hard to excuse. This national airline system going down at 8:30 at night, and it's not resolved until the next morning. They have to reboot and do a ground stop nationwide in order to handle it. And it's a reminder that these cabinet jobs are often given to people who are seen as rising politicians, future stars in the Democratic Party, but they're management jobs. The Transportation Secretary is the guy in charge of the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, in charge of this whole thing. And the second point I would make is that, as our editorial today on this describes, Mayor Pete is not really the model of contrition here, and there's a real gap between the way he's speaking about it when it's a government failure and the way that he treated Southwest Airlines, for example, over Christmas when it had problems with its systems that caused a lot of delays and cancellations.
Yeah, it was really remarkable to see the difference here. I mean, he was all righteous anger back with Southwest, demanding that they refund all the money, talking about how this was unacceptable. And yet now we just get told that when something far more consequential in terms of grounding the entire United States commercial air fleet happens, that, it's a glitch or a complication. It isn't a glitch, by the way. This is something far more dramatic. This was the first ground stop the United States had had since 9/11, which tells you something. And, if it is a glitch and if these things happen all the time, as he said, why isn't that redundancy already built into the system? And there's already been a lot of conversation about whether or not Pete Buttigieg was ever the right guy for this job. This is a person that prior to this position had been the mayor of South Bend. He didn't have a lot of experience, certainly not any real experience in this particular area. And we can't blame it all on him. The problems that have been going on at the FAA and basically government management problems, bureaucracies that do not seem to be able to implement the modernization plans that Congress has mandated. That is a lot of it. But, here's a question. Where's all the infrastructure money that taxpayers doled out last year? And why didn't some of it go to building some more redundancy into the system or hurrying the FAA along on its mission to modernize? Those are all some really good questions.
Well, on the point about money, Delta's CEO Ed Bastian is out Friday. He was speaking on CNBC, and he says that the solution here is to give more funds to the FAA. And here's the quote: "I lay this on the fact that we are not giving them the resources, the funding, the staffing, the tools, the technology they need to modernize the technology system. Hopefully this will be the call to our political leaders in Washington that we need to do better," unquote. And I take the point that Kim makes that we just passed this enormous bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, was the FAA not part of that? Or, was it not part of the last infrastructure bill? It seems like it's always infrastructure week in Washington, and yet not for the things that apparently seem to really matter when it comes to keeping the airlines going. Alicia, what do you make of this idea that the solution is we just need to raise more money for the FAA?
Well, some of the FAA, by the way, is actually funded by airline fees. And so maybe Delta is hoping that maybe if the government, provides more money, maybe will be less pressure for more fees and revenue collection from the airlines. But the problem isn't funding like it isn't. Same thing with the IRS when you have incompetence and old technological systems, and we've seen this with the IRS and their quote-unquote customer service and how they process tax refunds and tax filings. They're relying on antiquated systems, but it's not because they don't have enough money to upgrade. They just haven't gotten around to it for one reason or another. And the same thing is an issue here with the FAA. And Congress in 2003 mandated that it invests in a number of technological upgrades called this next generation system that a lot of other countries were further ahead in, and to implement these changes by 2025. Now, an Inspector General report in 2021 found that it was way behind schedule, probably at least 5 years, maybe more. And the problem, again, it wasn't lack of funding. It was the lack of planning and the consideration of how different systems interact. We actually saw this with the NOTAM system. Some of it has actually been updated, but some of it's actually much older. While that doesn't seem to be the reason why there was this failure, a lot of the FAA system is still very, very clunky, and it's because this bureaucracy has just not done a very good job of being stewards of taxpayer dollars.
But that suggests that maybe what's needed here is some more radical medicine. And it may be a hard thing for hot-blooded American patriots to say, but maybe Canada is right. In the 1990s, Canada transferred its air traffic control systems to a private entity, a nonprofit. And there might be something, Kim, to recommend that model. The government, the FAA, could stay in its traditional role as a regulator, as a safety overseer. But if the aviation interests, including the airlines, general aviation companies, pilots, were in control of the systems that they needed to run America's airlines, to run America's airports, then they could manage them. It seems to me that you'd get faster modernization. The complaints that pilots have with the NOTAM system, that a lot of the information is irrelevant to them, or that it's written in acronyms and jargon, seems like you would get faster resolution to issues like that. And to the extent that this is a problem of funding, if the airlines and all these other people that are using the system were in control of raising the fees to operate it, then there would be no more excuse that Congress didn't give us the money to do what we needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm all for mimicking Canada in this position. And, there was this proposal when Trump was in office to turn the FAA into a nonprofit. It would have had a board of directors that was made up of different stakeholders, and all of it run, as you say, by user fees. That idea has the support of, interestingly, not just the airlines, but also the unions. And if you look at what's happened in Canada, I mean, it really shows how much better the system has worked. They are miles ahead of us in terms of some of the technology that they have adopted. It allows them to simply get a hold of new technology and modernize far more quickly than is ever possible in the federal government. It always reminds me, Milton Friedman had a great line. He said that, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, it would be out of sand in 5 years. The federal government can't do anything correctly. And I think that there's some real merit to looking to some reform and bold ideas that, by the way, are not radical in that we don't know how they'll turn out. We do know how they'll turn out because we have had a country like Canada that's tried it and it's working.